Well, to be honest, did he ever have 150,000 people to begin with?
Apparently he had half of that, and then Charest sold, 2,000?
Tens of thousands.
Ooh.
He overperformed in Calgary.
Ooh. I guess we'll find out if that matters. It probably doesn't.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jacob Kenny, and I'm here with a supplemental episode from Speech from the Throne, episode 16.5, regarding the resignation of the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and second, the surprise disqualification of Patrick Brown from the CPC leadership race back here in Canada. First, Liam is in the studio with me, and we will talk about the resignation of Boris Johnson. There was a vote of no confidence from Boris Johnson's own Conservative caucus that he only narrowly avoided. And so he had at most a year to sort things out. And unfortunately for him, yesterday, July 6th, he lost two of his central cabinet ministers, his health minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, finance minister, and 50 MPs resigned from Boris Johnson's caucus. Boris Johnson was forced to respond by firing one of his chief, I would say, frenemies, his ally, Michael Gove. But even after trying to force all of the anti-loyalists out of his cabinet, Bojo could not find enough support to stay in power. And early Thursday, July 7th, he resigned as leader of the Conservative Party of Britain and will remain as Prime Minister only until a new leader of that party is selected to serve as Prime Minister after him in November of this year. So I suppose this really is a shot in a very long and torturous civil war that Liam and I have also brought up before in previous podcasts. A civil war in the English-speaking conservative movement between a new rising far-right populism and an old market-style conservative neoliberal movement. And neither side seems to be fully able to destroy the other, and neither side seems to fully be able to rule the other. And unfortunately, what we have in the middle is chaos. Now, there have been people who are better at managing this chaos, and for some time it looked like Boris Johnson was going to be able to survive this civil war, because he followed a lot of the other English-speaking conservative that we like to talk about, Doug Ford's policies. Just like Doug Ford got rid of Dean French, his far-right strategist and chief of staff, Boris Johnson also got rid of Dominic Cummings, a man that served very much a similar role. And he paid for that. Dominic Cummings was the one that leaked the Partygate scandal into the press. Dominic Cummings was the one that showed that when Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, was telling all the people of the UK to stay at home, he was partying with all his closest friends. A party that, it seems, got him COVID, where he nearly died of the disease. And so he paid very dearly for that scandal. But unlike Doug Ford, Boris Johnson was never quite able to pivot away from his ideology. He kept getting pulled back by his populist tone. With his response to COVID, he remained ideological like Kenny. And so the UK ended up with the highest death toll because they had the least restrictions in all of Europe. And even worse, in Northern Ireland, with his extreme Brexit policy, Boris Johnson started threatening the very fragile peace that existed in Northern Ireland, forcing Northern Ireland into his extreme hard Brexit approach, something that could very easily lead to more terrorism, to more death and destruction, like we saw in the Troubles a few decades ago. And so, where in Ontario, the establishment of the PCs was willing to defend Doug Ford's stupidity, to defend him from all the scandals he created for himself, the establishment in the UK was not willing to do the same for Boris Johnson. And now they have stuck the final knife into his back. But like in Alberta, where the establishment, it seems, got rid of Jason Kenney as well, that does not mean that the replacement of Boris Johnson is going to be any less populist or extreme than Bojo was himself. In Alberta, Danielle Smith, one of the leading contenders to replace Jason Kenney as premier, forced all of the major UCP leadership candidates into debate on sovereignty, where she was willing to put out a statement saying that, Alberta shouldn't be enforcing Canadian law. And really the hard right figures, both Brian Jean and Danielle Smith, have forced all of the UCP contenders down this rightward path where no one seems to be able to take a centrist approach. And I do fear that something similar could happen in this race to replace Boris Johnson as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The ministers that resigned from his cabinet, notably Sajid Javid, has already said he wants to run to replace him, and he's more centrist. He seems more ordinary. But at the same time, we have guys like Jacob Rees-Mogg in Boris Johnson's caucus, a guy who's an even more extreme Brexiteer, a guy who's anti-abortion, who is willing to appear with white supremacists on their podcasts, and a religious extremist. And it seems just as likely that someone of his ilk could end up replacing Boris Johnson. So this is really where the Conservative Party sees itself. This great civil war that continues to devour its young. He's resigned, but the war is far from over, and more chaos seems on the horizon. So I'll toss it up to you, Liam, and see what your thoughts are on that.
Jesus, what are my thoughts on that? Well, I mean, you touched on a lot of stuff that I agree with. And I can already hear our friend Cody getting disappointed that we're not going to have it out and that I haven't dropped the gloves. But, I mean, you can't compare all conservative parties across the world to each other in every single way. But, I mean, I do think this UK situation is a harbinger or potential harbinger of what could come for the Canadian Conservative Party. And whether it's Poilievre or someone else by some miracle that manages to win the leadership contest, I think the party is going to have some trouble staying united. And one of the reasons why some people might be saying that it's apples to oranges when I compare the UK situation to the Canada situation. In the UK parties, including the Conservatives, there can be like 4, 5, 6 factions of the party, which is also the case in Canada. But the difference is that they actually will put their vote where their mouths are when it comes to who the leader is and what kind of policies are being put forward by their own party. So that means a lot more opposition from a leader's own caucus when certain sections of caucus don't feel like it's going their way. And that includes, unlike in Canada, public dissent and public opposition. Now, we're starting to see drips of that in Canada, like Ed Fast, who is known to be helping out the Charest campaign, resigned his critic portfolio within the Conservative Party because some caucus members felt like when he was denouncing the idea of cryptocurrency as an opt-out of inflation kind of thing, sort of explaining how ridiculous that seemed and sounded to everyone but the Poilievre campaign, some caucus members got upset and said that he wasn't being impartial. So there's quite a sensitivity in Canada as to how your caucus can revolt, but it's very clear that we've seen levels even in Canada of open dissent, of people talking to the media with name attribution like we've never seen before. And I think, sure, maybe the culture is different between the two countries, but I think it would be stupid for Canadian Conservatives to look at what's going on in the UK and just ignore it. I think no matter who the leader is, they're going to have trouble uniting the party, and they'd be best to try to bring anybody under the same tent as much as they can, and that includes Poilievre, but I don't think he'll do it. Now, pivoting to Patrick Brown, which happens to be similarly timed, we got 2 Conservatives with B's in their name, one a last name, one a first name. What's, coincidence? I think not. No.
This little rat is guilty! Guilty! This little rat is dead! He moved! Right there! Look, I know it's you! Coincidence? I think not.
Clearly the lizard people, I think.
It's got to be the lizard people. The lizard people are behind it. We've known for many, many years that lizards controlled everything, and also the sky is actually pink, not blue. So, checkmate, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
Checkmate, liberals. I don't even know how to play chess.
Anywho, talking about Brown specifically, he's the other guy with a B in his name that we're talking about. So he's claiming that he hasn't done anything wrong. The party has accused him of violating the leadership contest rules by reportedly having some sort of private entity pay one of his staffers. I'm not even sure what the substance of the allegation is beyond that. The party isn't saying. Brown claims he doesn't know what it is beyond that, claims complete innocence, which is dubious because he's a guy that has gotten himself into trouble ethically multiple times in the past.
Famously non-innocent person.
Exactly. It's like if it was anyone else, I'd be more willing to be like, maybe maybe there's something afoot in the Tories here, and maybe there is. Like maybe there are members of the leadership organizing committee that don't like him. I don't know. It's clear there's no appeal process. I think that's a problem. The thing about Brown, obviously he's not going to get back into the race, but Mélanie Paradis was on the Evan Sullivan show on CFRA yesterday, and they were talking about Patrick Brown being out of the race, and he's obviously not going to get back in the race. That's clear. But one thing he's good at is, and she pointed this out very, very eloquently, was he knows how to sell a message. He's one of those guys with that rare talent. Like, I would go as far to say, like Bill Clinton, who can look you in the eye and sell his message to you. He went on Evan Sullivan's CTV show the other day to explain his side of the story. And I don't believe him for a second. That's because I know sort of his history. A lot of Canadians who aren't politicos aren't going to follow his history as closely. And to be honest, a lot of people from Barrie, Ontario, where I spent a lot of my life, still love Patrick Brown. You know, he was very active in the community there, and a lot of people, particularly conservative-leaning people, still really love him. I don't know why, but they do. So he's a guy that has managed to dust himself off and get back on his feet. And he's a no-holds-barred type of guy that when he's in trouble and he has nothing to lose, all the guns come out. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a very nasty court case that drips very embarrassing things about the Conservative Party out to the general public. Maybe not things that other parties haven't done. For example, it's an open secret that memberships are purchased improperly, and that's rather common, and it's laughed about by insiders. But the public isn't in the know about all of that. So if Brown drips something out about maybe membership improprieties or allegations about how the party is handling this race that don't reflect well on the party, it could do a lot of damage to the party. And to date, what I have to point about the party, I guess it's only been a couple days, but they're not learning lessons from Boris Johnson on this. I don't find they are, because they're letting the communication vacuum open wide, and they're letting Patrick Brown fill it. All they're saying is, here's a summary of the allegations. We're not going to say who the company is. We're not going to say who the staffer is. We're not going to tell you anything. There's no appeal. And people who don't know Patrick Brown, who don't know that he's kind of slimy, are going to take his side. And I think that's a real danger to the party.
Okay, so it's an interesting take you have there, Liam, because you're saying that the Conservative Party of Canada isn't learning from the example of Boris Johnson. I would actually argue the complete opposite. I think Pierre Poilievre, and that's clearly the overwhelming conservative consensus right now, is Pierre Poilievre's camp, is learning from the example of Boris Johnson and from the example of Jason Kenney, that if you keep a big tent party, if you are a populist that's trying to move your Conservative Party to the right to meet the ordinary members, but you keep in your caucus elements of the old centrist neoliberals, you create an eternal conflict that always has the opportunity to swallow you up. And so conservatives like Doug Ford, they solve this conflict in the conservative movement by getting rid of the far right. PP cannot do that. He cannot get rid of the far right. He is the far right. So his only alternative, if he's not going to get swallowed up by this civil war, as both Kenney and Boris Johnson did, is to get rid of the centrists, is to get rid of the people that are fighting back against this rightward push, against this populist push. And that is really what this disqualification of Patrick Brown is. He doesn't even want Patrick Brown to get onto the ballot. He doesn't want Patrick Brown to enumerate his position, because that would show that, there's 150,000 or there's so many hundreds of thousands of people that support this centrist position. And so there might only be like a handful of guys in caucus who are centrist, but so long as they know that there's a portion, and a large portion of conservative members who support them, they'd always feel the moral superiority necessary to attack Poilievre, to stab him whenever he feels vulnerable. And that's exactly what happened with Boris Johnson and with Kenney. If instead Pierre Poilievre attacks first, gets rid of the centrists, excises them from his caucus, and then concentrates entirely his power in a rightward direction, he can solidify his support and prevent the civil war from swallowing him up. So I do think that he's learning. It's just that the lessons that he's learning is on how to build a more competent far-right administration than what we've seen thus far from any of the English-speaking conservative reactionaries. And this is what really disturbs me. Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, they were part one, and they were the experiments from which everyone is learning. And now people that are watching are using their experience to develop a much more effective method of garnering and utilizing this populist power. And that is what really disturbs me about this exercise.
But can Tories truly rid themselves of the centrist element in their party without, and you and I have gone back and forth about this one, Cody, there might be an argument coming. So listen closely, Cody. You know, we've gone back and forth on can the Conservatives actually meaningfully rid themselves of the centrist element of the party without some sort of rump, and I'm not saying they'd form government, but with some sort of rump caucus existing and disrupting their ability to compete in races, which even the PPC, who barely managed 7%, managed to disrupt at least 30 ridings for the Conservatives. Who's to say that some sort of rump centrist party might break off? When you have guys like Brian Mulroney, Ed Fast, Marjorie Le Breton saying they don't see themselves in the party anymore, do we see a split? Is it just speculation?
Yeah, well, this is why I bring up the Alberta example, because in the 2019 election, there was a third party, the Alberta Party, that was a splinter originally of the Alberta Liberal Party, but it got taken over by disgruntled PCs. A former PC health minister / former mayor of Edmonton, Stephen Mandel, aggressively took over the leadership of the Alberta Party and started running it essentially as like a centrist party between the NDP and the Conservatives, and the United Conservatives under Kenney. And his whole spiel in 2019 was that, you know, we are the centrist party. The other two alternatives have gone way too far to the right and left, and ordinary Albertans are getting left in the middle. They need to pick us. And they got destroyed. And Jason Kenney completely clobbered them. So I do think that it's very easy to destroy these centrist rumps. That they can try to break off if they want, but so long as they don't have any sort of regional appeal, in the same way that like when the Bloc Québécois peeled off from the PCs in the 90s, they could use their regionalist base to really screw up the PC coalition. These centrists that exist in the CPC do not have a regional base. Maybe in Atlantic Canada, that's the best I could say for them. Maybe in Quebec as well. But the regional strengths of the Conservative Party are all the much more aggressively far-right elements. It's really their marginal seats, the ones that they could lose very easily in an election. Those are the ones that are more centrists. And so if they split off and form their own parties, those are the weakest MPs, and they would be the easiest to lose to either a far-right Conservative or a Liberal or an NDP. And so I really do not doubt for a minute that if there was a Conservative splinter group that tried to be more centrist, that they would be absolutely annihilated.
Now, I take your point in terms of like the raw seat haul that some sort of centrist rump would actually bring home, but I caution you on comparing the UCP situation in 2019 directly to this situation. I think the difference between the two situations, the key difference, there's many, is that you had Rachel Notley, who Jason Kenney had successfully framed and destroyed, and everybody was ready to have anybody but her. I think that was a major factor.
But isn't that similar to how the CPC has attacked Justin Trudeau, and now there's a nobody but him, right?
The main reason that I don't think it's the same is when you look at the federal situation, the best guy who's done a good job of convincing people that he's not good at governing is Justin Trudeau himself, to be honest with you. Like, yes, there can be some debate that he's slowly walking into the framing the Conservatives set up for him in 2015, where he's not ready and this and that and the other thing. Like, sure, maybe. But I would say it's less a success of Conservative framing and more just his inability to get out from his own way, to be honest with you. And I think if Pierre Poilievre manages to pull off a victory, it'll be less because of the collapse of a centrist rump, if there is one, and more because it's Justin Trudeau and everybody wants rid of him, especially 3 years from now. I do think you have a point in terms of maybe some of the ad hominem attacks and other attacks that have been used against Trudeau. I mean, Kenney imported the angry adversarial federal Conservative tone and brought it into Alberta. So he definitely did rip a page out from that playbook in terms of the framing, in terms of how he communicates, that sort of pseudo-populist style. And I think Poilievre will continue that. But I do think that if Pierre Poilievre loses, there will be 3 reasons. One would be a massive scandal. The second would be a new Liberal leader. And the third would be, like the PPC did in previous elections, maybe they weren't always in key ridings, but the vote interfering in enough seats so that the Liberals can come through the middle in some of the key places they might need, where there are more centrists who could go liberal and some might go to the new blue, but that means that, or whatever the split off is, if there is one, but that means even less votes going to the Conservative Party and probably allowing the Liberals to come up the middle with scared progressives that just swallow their pride and vote for the Liberals again. I don't know. That's my rebuttal. I mean, maybe you can tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, I think that there is so much uncertainty as to when the next election is going to be called because we're in this inflationary cycle where the NDP really is just waiting for a major crisis point before they can pull the plug on this government, because maybe this is delusion, but I think that they definitely think that they can steal a lot of Justin Trudeau support, especially if Justin Trudeau remains in power and more leftists like you and I are turned off from Justin Trudeau and have nowhere else to go but the NDP. And so the reason why PP wants to have this fight early, wants to get rid of the centrists as much as possible, is that, you know, we're talking about an election 3 years from now, and in PP's mind, he's planning for an election like 6 months from now. He's planning for an election much sooner, perhaps as soon as he becomes the leader of the opposition. And potentially, Trudeau could be the one to trigger that election himself because he wants to fight PP while he's still fresh. And so rather than letting this centrist cancer in the middle of the Conservative Party metastasize and then eventually develop into its own tumor that starts to attack the Conservative Party like the PPC did, Pierre Poilievre wants to excise it, wants to remove it as soon as possible, and then run in an election when these centrists don't have enough time to organize into a coherent party that could attack him, and then basically put them down as soon as possible. Now, Patrick Brown did have a point, I think, when he went on Evan Sullivan's show and said that the major beneficiary of this chaos in the short term is Trudeau. He definitely is looking better in the face of all this infighting in the CPC, but in the longer term, by getting rid of his enemies, by forcing his enemies, particularly in Leoc, in the head of the Conservative Party, to the fore. So now Pierre Poilievre can identify who was the Patrick Brown supporters and who wasn't. By doing this early, there is some major benefits in that he can do an effective purge, and when that election does come, he'll be in a stronger position for it. So I don't know. I don't know if this is necessarily as bad of a move as you're thinking. Like, I do think that this is very classic power politics, and it's definitely blood sport. It's definitely nasty. But I do think that if it is Pierre Poilievre that's behind this, he's setting himself up well for when the potential election it might likely be.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, I think it's clear to anybody, particularly after the recent news, that Pierre Poilievre is probably laughing his way to the vote on September 10th, at least at the moment.
Oh, yeah, like that's done. Yeah.
Now, what I'm more so referring to is the party and the short-term damage it's going to take from Brown, who is an effective communicator, in that there are the Conservatives again, you know, with their infighting and their improprieties. And we know that a lot of Conservatives don't like Brown. Who's to say they aren't going after him? Which I don't believe, but I'm just saying this is the narrative that if the party doesn't get ahead of this and talk about what the allegations actually were in the public sphere and shut down any sort of inkling that people are getting that Brown is the victim here, it would be in their interest. Otherwise, they're going to have another few weeks of embarrassing headlines, and possibly worse, because if he's got Maria Nine working for him, who's one of the most notorious, high-powered defense lawyers you could possibly get, you can bet there's going to be embarrassing tidbits leaking in the media about the Conservative Party, just like in the UK, in the agonizing months we spent watching Bojo collapse.
But this is why it's a good time for Pierre Poilievre to be doing this, because when you're the prime minister, when you're the leader of the party, you can't accept anything but unanimous support underneath your name. That's why Jason Kenney and Boris Johnson, they both survived on pure numbers, their non-confidence votes. Jason Kenney's of the members of the party, Boris Johnson of the members of his caucus. They both technically got more than 50% of the support they needed. But there was so much of an opposition that it became obvious to everyone that they could not stay. But when you are just a candidate for the leader, you don't need to show this perfect unity. You're only trying to get a raw majority of the points available in the leadership contest, and it seems impossible now with Brown gone that Pierre Poilievre cannot obtain that majority. And so he can afford a little more chaos. He can afford to take more of these fights. Pierre Poilievre can afford to create a little bit of disunity of some fractions and to fight and wreck his opposition as much as possible, because he isn't the leader yet. And so from his point of view, probably it's better to have these bloody fists right now when he doesn't have the dignity of the office to worry about than after he becomes leader and he has to show that there's some sort of unanimity behind him. If he can destroy his opposition before he becomes leader, then by definition, the party that remains is going to be unanimously behind him. Versus if he keeps them alive and becomes leader afterwards, there is inevitably going to be a faction that's against him, and it becomes impossible for him to project this image of the great uniter. And I do think that it really is just that idea, not the reality, but just the idea that you're the great uniter. I mean, Stephen Harper was a pretty far-right guy, but he got rid of all of his opposition before he took on the office, and he was able to project this image of I'm the uniter, and that kept a lot of those centrists continuing to vote for a party that really they wouldn't have otherwise recognized. And I do think that Pierre Poilievre is going to follow a similar strategy of he's going to destroy other types of conservatives and become the only conservative option that's available. And right now we're in the knife fighting phase to determine that he's the sole option.
Well, we're certainly in the knife fighting phase. One sort of detail to add to what you're saying there, if that is the case, Pierre Poilievre, we know he's a pugilist. We know he likes a good fight. He won't shy away from a good scrap. Now, despite that, we're seeing signs that he's running something of a front-runner campaign. And the reason I say that is there's one final, as of now, debate that's happening for the Conservative leadership. It's the Western Standard. It's a right-wing publication out of Alberta that's running it. And Pierre Poilievre isn't showing up. Instead, he's going to meet with Brett Wilson. And he's a former Dragon's Den guy and Twitter crackpot. So you can look him up. I'll let you do that. But why this matters is skipping debates is a classic front-runner move when you're trying to avoid additional scrutiny. The best thing for Pierre Poilievre to do, at least as the conventional wisdom goes, I'm not saying I agree, but as the conventional wisdom in politics goes, is to stay as far away from forums like debates as possible, because it opens up more opportunities to put out more embarrassing sound bites that you say, or more things of other candidates attacking you and making you look bad, whether it's out of context or not, which they all engage in. And that's why it doesn't surprise me even a little bit that he's skipping that debate. Now, will there be another debate? We don't know. Will he go? We don't know. But if Pierre Poilievre, who we know as this pugilist, is starting to assert his dominance over the party by skipping a debate, then a lot of those maneuvers are going to have to take place behind the scenes, because right now he's not really doing anything that would indicate to me that he's positioning to purge. I don't know. That's what I think so far, because we're 2 months out from the vote and he's skipping a debate. And I know why, but that's what indicates to me that maybe he's not going to do what you're saying he should do.
Yeah, I think it's just the presence of Leslyn Lewis there that would prevent him from going on that sort of public attack, because if he tries to be holier than thou on right-wing issues, he has someone that's farther to the right of him that's going to basically use his exact same lines against him. So if he's going to take the strategy of gutting the party of its centrists, he needs to do it behind the scenes in these shadowy sorts of ways, like the disqualification of Patrick Brown. And I think we can sort of assume that now the pressure from his campaign is focusing on Charest, and Charest now seeing that he has essentially no path to victory. I think once Pierre Poilievre's team starts digging more into Charest's long and storied history and starts publishing whatever oppo research they have on him, Charest, wanting to maintain his reputation, I feel, is almost inevitably going to step away from this contest and not bother seeing it to the end. And this is the strategy he's going to take.
Aitchison, surprise victory.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Aitchison's going to be the Jeb Bush of 2022.
Scott!
Or at least...
I mean, we're making some jokes here. It's not impossible that small guys can pull through. Andrew Scheer, we have to remember, had only 10,000 memberships sold and somehow managed to win.
Yeah, but with 14 other people running.
Yeah. So we have a smaller field, which I'd say that's a very good point. So we have a smaller field, and we have massive amount of memberships very committed to their respective candidates. Some of those memberships, like if a candidate drops out of the race, some of those memberships will just, they won't vote. They just won't vote. The ones that do vote, their candidates will be spread everywhere. I mean, obviously some of those will go to ideologically similar people, I imagine, like Aitchison or Charest, and some of them might just do a full Brown Poilievre switch for some reason.
No, like the media suggesting it, but I highly doubt that anyone that Brown signed up is actually going to continue to vote in this election.
I mean,
maybe you'll get a handful, but Brown's strategy was to go into different faith or ethnic communities and find the leader of that community, make a personal connection with him or her, and then have that leader sign up as many people as possible within their local community. Once Brown is gone, the personal connection between him and the leader is also immediately severed, and there's no reason for that local faith or ethnic community leader to galvanize the rest of his support and force them to vote, or to encourage them to vote, is probably a better way of phrasing it, in the election. And I think that that's essentially what is going to happen, is that Brown is very good at milking these personal relationships, because once he's gone, there's no one there to do it. And unless maybe Jean Charest can find some deal that he can make with Patrick Brown to maintain his campaign infrastructure and to get all these people to go to Charest. That's a really hard conversion. That's a really hard sell. And to be honest, Charest has nothing really to give Brown. It's obvious now that Pierre Poilievre is going to win. So what can Charest really offer Brown at this point to keep him on side? Patrick Brown now has the perfect opportunity to step away. He can take the moral high ground, say that he was cheated, he was jilted by a far-right party, and he can claim that he was going to have the most votes in urban areas, that he was going to do so amazingly, that he's the best organizer ever. But again, because he's been disqualified, we'll never get to know if he would have been or not. So he can say whatever he likes, keep his reputation intact, hope for the best, that Pierre Poilievre gets destroyed by Trudeau in the next election or by another leader in the next election, and then he can come back stronger than ever in 2025 or 2026. That seems to be Patrick Brown's strategy. He has no reason to force his voters into this contest. He can have an honorable exit and continue as mayor of Brampton, which I suspect is what is going to happen.
Apparently, he teed up to run in the 2018 PC leadership race until the party basically added these arbitrary rules to make it impossible for him to run.
Good.
So, he's not enamoring himself. He's not ingratiating himself to the party brass, though I don't think he wants or needs to if he would just stop committing alleged fraud.
Another old-style politician. Those personal relationships, as I said, with the religious and ethnic leaders, sometimes it's because they like each other. Sometimes it's because there's some double dealing there. It's because there's some insider trading. And that's just how politics used to be in the last century. It was very corrupt. And Patrick Brown's a guy that reeks of that sort of style. He's the Duplessis sort of guy. He's the sort of guy that has, $30,000 in his office storage vault and don't ask questions about why it's there.
The other notable thing is that over 150,000 people, I think, registered on the Conservative website, so not through any particular candidate site. Now, that doesn't mean that some of those people weren't registering on the Conservative website because they thought they had to and they're already committed to a candidate. But there certainly is going to be a large number of those people who signed up through the website who perhaps aren't committed to a candidate, and vice versa. There will be a certain amount of people from Brown's Hall that will vote. I don't think there will be a majority of people that will vote, but they will vote and they will go somewhere. Is there enough of them to matter? Nobody's really quite sure. Probably not. I mean, that's why Pierre Poilievre is happy, at least in the short term, but anything can happen in 2 months, and a week can sometimes feel like a year in politics. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, no, that is a very good point. I genuinely feel that PP has it in the bag at this point, but none of us are clairvoyant, and certainly when you and I decided to take last week off as a holiday, neither of us could have predicted that it would have ended up being the most busy week of the whole summer in terms of political news.
That's, what, I think that sums it up better than anyone else could have summed it up. I hope you enjoyed that classic Jacob Kenny tying a bow on the little gift, and I hope this was a gift for your day, your commute, for your afternoon, morning, evening, whenever you're listening to this. I hope you enjoyed our little unpacking of this, and stay tuned for next week.
Yes. This Sunday, we'll be releasing an episode where we will talk with the controversial tech guru and sci-fi quote machine, Blake Lemoine, the one who has been advocating for the rights of AI programs, specifically of a chatbot named Lambda that he was asked by Google to investigate and he believed has become sentient. Tune in this Sunday to listen.
See you then.